Today, I'm excited to talk to LaTasha Waddy, the author of the new book, The Unbelievable Journeys of Gabby and Josh, a book for children at 5 to 8 years old on financial literacy. It's a fabulous book and it's part of a series. LaTasha is president of NFM Lending, and I'm excited to have her today. Let's talk about how did you get into our world of mortgage lending, and then how did you get into the world of actually writing a book?
No, absolutely, Pat. Thank you so much for having me. And like most of my colleagues in the industry, I got into the industry by accident and also by the law. Actually, I worked with an individual, my very first job in a law firm, and she and I became fast friends and stayed connected throughout the years. She left the firm, went on to other things. I left the firm, went to a couple of other firms, and in 2010, she reached out to me and she said, I have this opportunity in a mortgage company, and here's where it is, and here's what we're doing. And I came in and I was like, what's happening here? I didn't know about RESPA, didn't know about TILA, but I knew Google. And so I kind of Googled my way through until I had a better understanding. And that's how I started in the mortgage industry in 2010. NFM has been my first, and I'm hoping my last mortgage job. And so I've been here for 15 years, and it's been incredible.
Yeah,
Books, how did the books come about?
sure.
I'm a lawyer, by profession, and I write for a living, and I always loved writing. And I had my son when I was in high school, and I wanted to write something for my daughter, and I wanted to write something about making wise decisions, things of that nature. And it just over time evolved into, why don't I still write something that includes my daughter, my other children, but why don't I lean into what I've learned in the mortgage industry, and how do I do that in a creative way? And so the books I started writing in the pandemic. And I think a lot of people wrote books in the pandemic, what I'm learning. And I started writing them in the pandemic. And last year, I introduced the first book of The Unbelievable Adventures of Gabby and Josh Can. And I just actually completed my second book. And so the second book is now in illustration. And so I'm just super excited to introduce the Can family to the world.
So, Latasha, talk about what it is that kind of drove you to do that, and also talk about what kind of is the role that you see that the book plays, which is actually a fun way of telling a story that's really an important story.
Yeah, I have five children. I have children and I have grandchildren on the way. And I loved reading books to my children, and I would get into Cat in the Hat and Bernstein Bears, and
Yeah,
those were some of my favorites growing up. And so I thought of the end of how I want the series to end, which I would love for it to be a cartoon. I would love to have animation
sure.
around it to introduce financial concepts. And so I created a family, and I said, what could I call this family? I'll call this family the Can family, because you can do it. You can learn about money. And so I started creating these characters. It's Mama Can, it's Daddy Can, it's Josh Can. So they're all, the last name is Can.
Yeah,
And then the characters are created imagery wise based on my children. And so I wanted to give depth to the characters and the family, because I think when children are learning, whether it's learning to brush their teeth or anything like that, you see it in all of the, education and things that children learn, that there's characters associated with it. There's Sesame Street. And so I wanted to create like a depth of characters so that it kind of resonated with
yeah.
kids, and then to make it fun. And I literally just sat for months, really, and watched cartoons. Watched cartoons.
Okay.
cartoons I grew up with, the cartoons my grandchildren are watching, the television they're watching, and started to really kind of formulate these characters and write bios on who these individuals are
Hmm.
so that there was some substance to it, that there wasn't just, okay, I took these characters and then I made a story. I really wanted to think it through. Probably the lawyer in me.
Hmm.
The rhyming, happened by happenstance. And I said this on a previous interview, is that I was writing a story and I sent it to an editor to review it, and they hated it. They were like, I don't know what you're writing about. I don't know what this is. And so I was on a plane somewhere and I was writing a story about a little girl and her mom and a dollhouse. And I was like, well, maybe if I could make it rhyme, maybe that would be more catchy for
Hmm.
kids to catch on to, but also for parents to introduce financial concepts, which are very complex, right? So I write this poem and I send it, and she's like, that's it. This is what it is. Write to this cadence, make sure the rhymes, work. And so I'm like, great. So how do you combine rhyming,
Right,
adventure, and money?
right. Not easy. Well, that's what I was wondering about. Had you written rhymes before or poems before?
No.
Okay. Well, you did a great job, and I thought, were you doing, I hear what you were saying, but did the research kind of show that rhyming is in essence repetitive and therefore sticks in your brain more?
I think so. I read a lot of research about
Hmm.
children, and that the fact that they form their money habits
Hmm.
by the age of 7. So, studies have shown by the age of 7, children think they understand money. They have a psychological relationship with money. And then I went back to books that were my favorite books,
Hmm.
and Cat in the Hat, and that those books rhymed and they were telling
Sure.
you something, but they
Right.
rhymed. And also I grew up in the rap era. And so, what is rap music? Rap music is rhyming.
Yeah.
Music rhymes. And so that's kind of what led me to say, I think this will be good. It'll be catchy, it'll be a cadence. And it also felt familiar for when I was reading other books for
Hmm.
other authors that were very successful in the children book space.
So talk about for the listeners, in other words, you selected when it came to money to talk about savings. That's really what you're talking about, which I thought was really an important topic. How did you come? I mean, you could have started talking about, other things, but you started off with savings.
Yeah. Savings is what you need for home ownership. And
Yeah.
and
Hmm.
you have to build a foundation for
Hmm.
this path, because ultimately I want this
Hmm.
next generation. I want to reframe this conversation on what we think about money, how we approach
Hmm.
money. It feels very taboo. And so I want to normalize the conversation. And I think saving ties into that, because you're setting a goal, or there's something you want to purchase, or there's something you want to accomplish. Well, how do you do that? You do that by savings. And so the first book is about savings. The
Right.
second book is about earning. And the third book is about sharing. Because once you get to a place in your life, the hope is that you've been able to save and earn, but that you now can kind of look around and say, I have these resources. What can I do to improve someone else's life? How can I share some of the
Hmm.
resources? How do I share money? How do I take the money and buy things to share?
So, Natasha, did you of the characters and maybe talk about the characters, which of the characters actually probably was aligning with you more than anything, or what you thought that you wanted to share with the audience?
Yeah, I think it's Mama Can.
Okay.
So, Mama Can is a real estate agent. And so like there are bios. So if people follow me on Instagram,
Mm-hmm.
In the very beginning of some of my posts bios on all of these characters. And so
Mm-hmm.
Mama Can, has a family, has a business, is thriving, and really works to teach her children some of the things that she's learned along the way, to help other people get into homes. And so that is what resonates with me. And so for sure, Mama Can is very much my personality. And there are other books, and so like in other books you'll start to see more
Mm-hmm.
of the character development for that individual character, but then the other characters are based on my children. And so
Oh,
they're based on, Josh is my son. He's not 7, he's a senior in high school. and,
yeah.
and Gabby is a junior in college. And then I introduce my grandchildren in later books, and my other children in later books. But I have taken all the things I've amassed as a mom in terms of the personalities of the characters. And then I've kind of melded that with the experience I've had as a lawyer and also in the mortgage industry, and just kind of dialed it up so that it feels engaging, it feels fun, it feels exciting.
So I'm curious from the start to when you finally had it published,
Yeah.
and what was that length of time, and how many kind of iterations did you end up doing, and how you said you have an Instagram account. What's the name of that Instagram account? Is it
Yeah.
just the book or just your name?
It's just my name. It's
Okay.
at LaTasha Waddy. And so on that account, and I have LinkedIn too, but on the Instagram account, that's
Hmm.
where I really do a lot of content with the characters, with videos, information to parents to talk to them about how they can talk to their children about introducing money habits, allowance. What does that look like?
Hmm.
How do you give them chores around the house? What does it look like to earn? What do you do with birthday money? So taking kind of everyday things and introducing money concepts is what I'm doing on my Instagram account. But to go back to the illustration, so
Hmm.
it was a labor of love, because a lot of times illustrators, they already have like their own ideas of what the
Hmm.
character should look like. And I was very intentional that I wanted these characters to favor not just my children, but to favor a child. And
Hmm.
so for it to feel, very interactive and colorful, that
Hmm.
children would not just be excited by the story, but they would be excited about the graphics. And so probably a year it took of working
Hmm.
with the illustrators and giving them lots of examples and images and pictures of my children, and saying, no, this doesn't work. And I'm very anal retentive, I will admit that. It's a blessing and a curse, but like literally, Pat, down to this color shoe, this color shirt, put this bow in someone's hair. I mean, and my illustrator, she was like, oh, not another change again. But I'm like, I have to get these characters right, because it has to feel good to me and it has to resonate with me. And so a year it took. And the second book, it's probably been 6 to 8 months as well, of just getting the imagery down for that, because that second book features Gabby. And it is very much a birthday party, and it's all these fun things happening. And so I wanted to make sure that the imagery was engaging.
So what part of the book really kind of stretched you the most? Was it the rhyming, or did that come easy, or you're talking about the illustration component? What was it that, boy, this is more challenging than I thought.
Yeah, I would say all of it, quite honestly.
Yeah, yeah.
Because I don't, by nature, I don't talk to 6 and 7 and 8 year olds. But it might feel like that sometimes in my career, that I'm talking to children. But to be able to kind of go back to when my children were at that age and come up with concepts that still the story came across. So rhyming, I won't say it was easy. The difficult part was rhyming, but talking about money, but
Hmm.
talking about a story, but having a concept. So that was a challenge, and it took a lot of iterations, a lot of no, this doesn't work, and reading
Hmm.
aloud to get there because you don't. I didn't want the story of money to be lost in the rhyming. I wanted to make sure that the reader and the child, it was very clear that this story is about money.
So, what has been the feedback from children regarding it? In other words, who is that target base? Is it the 7-year-old that you said at that point in their life they start having these concepts, or is it younger than that? Or and what has been the feedback from what children have said about the book?
Yeah. And so the target age is really 5 to 8.
Mm-hmm.
And it's been important to me to have parents, where do I start? You know,
Mm-hmm.
parents can talk about making a bed very easily. They can talk about cleaning up behind yourself very easily. They don't know how to talk about money. And
Mm-hmm.
so I wanted to very much reach caregivers, educators, and parents with children to start these conversations because what ends up happening is you learn when you get your first credit card or you learn when you're working. And I'm not saying that's too late. You should learn when you can, but starting to introduce the foundation. And so the kids the first thing they're shocked about is that I actually wrote the book. And so, when I tell them I'm an author and I wrote this book, like it's like
Yeah, I'm sure.
you did, and their reaction to it is it really opens up conversation. So they start talking about what they'd like to save money for. They start talking about, oh my goodness, Josh spent all his money. Why did he spend, all of his money? And so the story is like this kind of gateway for children to start talking about money. And then of course they love the imagery of
Sure.
him being underwater and there are these sea creatures shopping and they think that's hysterical. And so the feedback has been, why did Josh spend all his clams, or why are you
Mm-hmm.
calling clams money? And so it just really starts to have this conversation around really some of the basics of money. I love reading to children. Like that's one of my favorite things is
Mm-hmm.
going out to schools or community
Mm-hmm.
centers and reading and seeing reaction. One of the other things I started doing, Pat, is I do travel a lot, whether it's like for work or
Mm-hmm.
personally. I bring books with me. And so I have met little kids on the plane and their parents are like, what am I going to do with this child to keep them quiet, or they're trying to keep them entertained, and I'll give them a book. And the book has a workbook with it that's a coloring book that
Okay.
has activities as well. And so I've started carrying these books on the planes with me and giving them
Yeah.
to kids. And I've gotten off the plane and the parents have like talk, thank you. Thank you for giving me this book, and can I get more information? And so that's been kind of my grassroots way to
Mm-hmm.
also reach kids and gets reactions from them. And what do you think about it? What could I have done differently? What else would you like to hear from these
Sure.
characters?
So you talked a little bit about the parents, and money is an emotional topic that is formed early on.
Yes.
I'm curious about what the parent reactions are because it's a topic that they don't really like to discuss.
Yes.
And I thought that the topic that you selected, the savings part, is probably the hardest part in a culture today where it's buy,
Mhm.
buy, 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 and not have any money.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so the parents are really thankful, quite honestly, because
Hmm.
they don't, in some instances, they don't know how to start that conversation. And
Correct.
in
Yeah.
many instances, they have their own, like you said, emotional
Component.
relationship to money. And so having something that is fun, something that is engaging, where they can just start with the basics around money has been the reaction of parents. And then I've had educators, read the books and they resonate with the workbook and they say, well, the book is one thing and that it's great to have the book,
Hmm.
but
Hmm.
what else can you offer to an educator or to a parent that wants to have some other conversations with their child? And so
Hmm.
it's a coloring book that has activities in it as well. And so
Hmm.
educators have come to me and said, we need to figure out how to get this in a curriculum. We need to figure out how to get these into schools. And so I'm grateful for the reaction that I had, because when you're creating something, it's personal to you,
Sure.
you
Hmm.
don't know if it's going to be terrible or people going to be like, what is this? And so I'm happy with the response, and it's really inspired and encouraged me that I need to continue on this path of offering this type of content so that I can help parents, educators, caregivers, and this next generation to reframe how they feel about money.
So, talk about for our listeners how to get the book and how to actually the workbook and all of that. What are the steps that you find that actually have had a more impactful effect on? Because it's ultimately a parent or an educator that
Yes.
has to actually bring this topic. So, how can our listeners get the book and the workbook and all of that, and talk about this issue about how to use the book?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And the book is on Amazon. And so The Unbelievable Adventures of Gabby
Yeah.
and Josh Can. The title is Josh's Clamtastic
Yeah.
Spending Quest. And so the workbook and the book are on Amazon. But if we really want to have reach, if people really want to support having
Hmm.
reach, you can, if you are a library card member, if you have a library card, you actually can recommend the book to the library system. And it's
Hmm.
really easy. You can, if you have a library card, you can go online with your library card and you can make a recommendation, recommend that this book is in the libraries. And then every child that's walking into a library can access this book. I went to a library to look at educational books on money. It was like three books. So there was an entire section of books for children. There were like three books on money. So I would highly recommend libraries. The second thing is there are a lot of nonprofits that
Hmm.
have children that or schools that they've adopted. I've partnered with nonprofit organizations. They've bought the books in bulk. I'll sign the books, I'll come read the books, and then you're reaching 100 kids, 200 children. And I've also partnered with other nonprofits that are doing education in the space. And then, businesses have some form of community outreach, and if they have children that they are supporting in that, then also that. But then in terms of the schools, my first path has been charter schools because there is a little bit more autonomy in terms of selection. I,
Yeah.
I live
Hmm.
in a very large county. It is going to be a lot of math and prayer to get the book into like some of these larger public schools, but private schools, charter
Yeah.
schools, those individuals, you can go to your board or you can go to your school and you can recommend the book for the school because there is a curriculum component with the workbook.
So how can we get the mortgage industry more involved with this? Let's get down to the nitty-gritty to our listeners today. So it just seems as if this should be something we should be really behind as an
Yeah.
industry.
And I will tell you, the mortgage industry has been very supportive. Mortgage Bankers Association, I've partnered with them on introducing the book, on doing some content around the book. I'm hopeful that the next MBA conference, I'll be able to have the book in the bookstore. So that's one thing. So conferences and things of that nature, if they have offerings where they're spotlighting authors, and Pat, you and I talked about it before this call, like we have a lot of authors in the industry. And so two things we have a lot of conferences
Yeah,
and
true.
we have a lot of authors. And how cool would it be as an industry if during one of these conferences we have some author spotlights? I think that
Mhm.
that's a great opportunity to bring people from the industry together that have taken this path to introduce a book, talk about the journey, but also talk about, the book and introducing the book to the industry. Realtors, like they give gift baskets, people give baskets to their individual consumers all the time after they purchase a home. Include the book there, include it as a giveaway there. Those are things that can be done to continue to have this outreach. And that's what I am continuing to talk through with my network on my social media of, you love the book, and that's incredible. Get the book into the hands of the ones who we're trying to reach, which is the children. So my goal, is to become like a best-selling author, but my goal is to reach as many children as possible with this book, and to have those conversations with the parents, to have this flywheel effect of our alpha generation, and even our, Gen Z and our millennials start to say, well, wait a minute, there are other things happening with this book. This person actually knows about home ownership. Maybe I should be thinking about home ownership too. So I really want to create this flywheel effect, that there's a community of individuals that are starting to think through foundational education for their children, but also as an adult. This woman who wrote the book is in the mortgage industry and she understands home ownership. Maybe I should be thinking about that too.
Well, I think I agree with you 100%. And I think we need to be more active as an industry on this issue. And really, the industry has really waited for people to want to buy a home. Whereas we got to start when they're younger.
That's
And
right.
so, and we're not doing that. And of course, this is really a grouping that, especially with what's going on technology-wise and all of these other things, that you have to serve at the younger age point. And
Yeah.
so it makes a lot of sense. And I'm certainly going to commit myself to helping you because I think it's a really important topic. And I know there's people in our industry, certainly our listeners, that they see this topic also. So I think you're doing a great thing for starting and raising a topic that's not discussed a lot and it needs to be. So any last thoughts that you would like to give today about, how you see this helping our industry? Because I think that's what it comes down to.
Yeah, I will say that 15 years in this industry, overseeing compliance, overseeing
Mm-hmm.
a lot of data for the last 15 years,
Mm-hmm.
and really studying this next generation of home buyers.
Correct.
The data is clear that there is a lot of interest, and the data is clear that some people are not knowing where to start. And
Mm-hmm.
so, we have to reframe and rethink about when that person is ready, when we put them in this funnel. It used to be a person, maybe 6 months, 12 months, they had to save, they had to correct
Yeah.
credit issues, things of that nature.
Mm-hmm.
We need to, as an industry, invest in making sure we think through a longer funnel. So, how do you start to introduce concepts in home ownership as early as elementary school, as
Mm-hmm.
early as, middle school? And so, like, as an industry, the takeaway here is that to continue this dream of home ownership, to make it a reality, to stop with the negative news around it's never going to happen, so we might as well give up. Like, let's just stop it as an industry and let's accept that this next population of consumers, they are going to be first generation in most instances. They are going to be first time home buyers. So how do we continue to create the tools from an education standpoint to start to put people in the funnel 2, 3, 4, 5 years down the road, so that they don't only realize home ownership, but that they sustain home ownership, and that they take this home ownership and use it as a vehicle for other things, like starting a business, like, putting your kids through school, like retiring comfortably.
Sure.
And that takes commitment and that takes intent. And so that's what I'm doing. And, anyone who wants to partner with me, provide me with insight, provide me with, resources, things of that nature, and vice versa. Like, this is what I'm called to do. This is my mission's work. And I'm not sleeping until it's done.
Well, I'm there with you, so I agree with you completely. So how can they get in contact with you?
Yeah, so I would say LinkedIn is great. A lot of mortgage industry professionals are on LinkedIn, so feel free to DM me on, I don't know if it's called DM, but either way, feel free to send me a message on LinkedIn and say that you listen to the podcast and you want to know more about the books and how we can collaborate. I'm also on Instagram. And for individuals that are looking to help a realtor or referral partners, or have things that might be giveaway opportunities, or even just wanting to learn about content that I'm doing around helping children be healthy financially, mentally ready for money, and mentally ready for home ownership, my Instagram is also a great place as well. And I have a little bit more fun on Instagram than I do on LinkedIn, quite honestly, because, I don't want to have, like, baby pictures and all these things on LinkedIn. And so, so the other side of LaTasha Waddy is on LinkedIn, is on Instagram.
Well, I recommend everybody to reach out to her, and certainly her book is fabulous. I think she's doing a terrific job in trying to really reach at an age that we really should be reaching about all these important financial topics. And I want to thank you so much, LaTasha, for joining us today and certainly sharing. And for those listening today, certainly sign up for our podcast and subscribe every week. We have somebody interesting like LaTasha talking about important topics. So thanks so much again, LaTasha.
Thank you so much for having me, Pat.
That's a wrap for this episode. Be sure to subscribe, leave a review, and share it with your team. Want more proven sales strategies? Visit patsherlock.com for expert resources, coaching, and sales training. Until next time, keep selling smarter and not harder.